Le Grand Charles de Gaulle, the voice of French liberation and military reform. It was the Second World War. France was overwhelmed by German military tactics, artillery, and warplanes. Admitting their defeat, the French government surrendered and sought to sign an armistice with Germany. But has the last word been said? Must hope disappear? Is the defeat definitive? No. Believe me, I am someone who speaks to you with full knowledge of the facts, and I tell you that nothing is lost for France. The same means that conquered us can one day bring us victory. A voice spoke from a radio broadcast, although only a few people heard. A voice that did not at all resemble the wail of a defeated lion, but of a soldier whose fight has only begun. Despite all our mistakes, all our failure to catch up, all our sufferings, there are in the world all the means necessary one day to overcome our enemies. Struck down today by mechanized force, we will be able to conquer in the future by a superior mechanical force. By the time this broadcasted, BBC, the broadcasting station, did not yet consider its importance. Yet, as succeeding speeches followed, more and more people from across France heard from the man behind the voice. Whatever happens, the flame of French resistance must not and shall not die. This man was Charles de Gaulle.
Avant! Fixe! Mettez au repos. Repos! Je ne vous féliciterai pas d'être venu. Vous avez fait votre devoir. Quand la France agonise, ses enfants se doivent de la sauver. C'est-à-dire...
Charles de Gaulle, who was then already the undersecretary for defense and war at the time of the broadcast, the voice who did not surrender amidst defeat and continued to fight for French liberation. De Gaulle was born in the estate of his grandparents from his mother's side in Lille. He grew up in the city of Paris, although he fondly spent holidays at Lille, where he got to spend time with his cousins on his mother's side, for his uncles on his father's side were childless. De Gaulle and his family were patriotic and conservative. His Catholic matriarch of a grandmother from his mother's side was too terrifyingly devout that he used to ask his cousin not to tell their grandma that he watched Carmen, an opera with controversial themes. Early on as a boy, de Gaulle already exhibited his patriotic ideals. He used to have a huge collection of toy soldiers and took the role of France when playing them with his brothers. He was not that studious, although he very much loved reading and writing poetry. De Gaulle had a deep influence on family values instilled in him since his childhood. His family was loyal to the family tradition, aversion to violent revolutions, and opposed the persecution of the Catholic Church. At 15, de Gaulle pursued a career in the military and entered the Special Military Academy at Saint-Cyr in 1908. Albeit initially not studious, this dream of his pushed him to take his academic studies seriously for the first time. De Gaulle was the first of his family to pursue such an interest. Other than his patriotic family background, de Gaulle's choice was said to be urged by the international context of the time, wherein France was in the midst of a political crisis and under the threat of Germany. The threat of Germany urged young de Gaulle to know the enemy better. Indeed, he was well versed in the German language and literature. De Gaulle used to be teased because of his height of 1.98 meters, and was called several names like the Great Asparagus, Fool in the Heights, and Le Grand Charles, or Big Charles. His teasers were not wrong though, for in the next few years, de Gaulle will indeed make a big name and take on a big role on the international stage.
For the first time for 14 years, Sir Winston Churchill met General de Gaulle, and a wartime partnership was remembered. The garden of the Hotel de Matignon, official residence of French premiers, had a more peaceful atmosphere than the London of the World War, where the British and French leaders worked together, though not without the occasional conflict of opinion. But while two men of such opposite temperaments couldn't help clashing now and then, each understood and respected the other. Now, de Gaulle conferred upon Sir Winston the Cross of Liberation. Nowadays, it's the honor most prized in France. Only two other non-Frenchmen have received it, President Eisenhower and the King of Morocco.
Having graduated with high marks from Saint-Cyr, de Gaulle chose to join the infantry division and became a sub-lieutenant in 1912 at Arras. De Gaulle served during the First World War, where he was wounded 3 times during the 1916 Battle of Douaumont. Due to geographical hindrances, de Gaulle's company was unable to see the enemy from a distance, which resulted in a massive amount of casualties that almost wiped out his entire division. De Gaulle was eventually taken prisoner after being presumed dead by his comrades. Although conditions were not cruel in prison, de Gaulle was devastated by his capture. He attempted to escape multiple times with 0 success. The impending armistice brought his eventual release in 1918. A few months after, he was desperate to be back in action after having wasted his years in prison. Indeed, he eventually became captain and served several countries such as Poland and Lebanon. He wrote critical works on the French defense policy, advocating for the roles of politicians to decide on military affairs and highlighting the need for armored vehicles to counter the powerful German power. In 1931, he joined politics and became the General Secretariat for National Defense in Paris. He continuously rose in ranks, having been promoted to colonel, then commander of tanks, to general, until he became the Undersecretary of State for War and National Defense during the Second World War. When the French government sought to sign an armistice with Germany, admitting the former's defeat, de Gaulle vehemently opposed. That he fled to London and publicly made an appeal through a BBC broadcast. In his exile in London, he formed armed forces called the Free French and created a new French government called the French Committee for National Liberation, wherein his leadership was recognized by Winston Churchill. Upon the liberation of France, de Gaulle became the head of the provisional government and guided the creation of a new constitution. He even introduced new measures such as the social security system. Although he resigned from his position after certain agreements with the Constitution of the Fourth Republic, he eventually returned to power during France's war on decolonization in Algeria.
It will be remembered that during the past 4 years, the Muslim and European population had little contact with one another owing to the rebellion of Muslim nationalists. Many observers saw in these demonstrations the sign of a new relationship between Muslims and Europeans in Algeria, in which both communities would share equally and completely all the benefits of their country.
In 1958, through his initiative, 80% of the citizens approved of the newly written constitution, giving birth to the Fifth Republic, with de Gaulle as the elected president. During his term, France developed its first atomic bomb in 1960. It finally embraced independence from U.S. military protection, albeit France still took part as a member of the NATO alliance. De Gaulle ended his political career with yet again one final resignation, when his plans for the reformation of the Senate and regionalization were rejected by the French people, which made him feel he lost the trust of the citizens. Like all other soldiers and leaders, de Gaulle was far from perfect. However, amid despair and loss of hope, he became the voice who once again uplifted the spirits of the French people. We will remember him as the big voice from a small radio who spoke of big words, the French patriot who never lost hope and faith in the French cause of liberation. Thank you for listening. In case you didn't know, hitting the like button helps the channel quite a bit. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can join me again next time as we look into the life of other historical figures that shaped the world as we know it.